sharing the Torah of the Zera Shimshon, he promises that our children and our families will see only great things. Bezrat Hashem, all those who are here learning and all those who are listening should see great things from all and have in everything that they do. So the Midrash starts. There's a Midrash in Sefer Priya, which is basically brought it's a Midrash. It's a book of I'll call it strange Midrashim, and you'll understand why in a second. It's actually brought down, in this case, it's brought down in what's called the Yalkut Ruveni in Bereshit. It says, Shala Moshe leMarom, and Moshe Rabbeinu ascended or went up to Har Sinai. Matzulo HaKadosh Baruch Mitzaolo LaKadosh Baruch Hu Shaya Omer Chava. He said, he sees that Moshe, he finds Hashem saying Chava, like Chava from the story of Bereshit. Amar lo, Moshe says to him, Ki hi hayta lo ein kol chai. Right? So Hashem answered him, Hashem answers him. Sorry, I skipped one. Amar lo, Ribone de'ami, my Chava. Why are we saying the word Chava? Right? Like what are we saying? What's the word? Why are we saying Chava? Amar lo, Ki hi hayta in kol chai. Hashem responds, as the pasuk says, Ki hi hayta in kol chai. She was the mother of the entire, world. Amar lo riboni de'alma. He says, Hashem, if that's the case, you can tikrala
Em kol chai.
Chaya. Em kol chai. Right? Chai, which would be chaya, not chava. Right? If we're saying it's em kol chai, she is the mother of all the women. Right? Or all of creation, excuse me, not women. If so, it says, we should say chaya, like chai, right? Em kol chai, not em kol chava. Right? Amar lo chava b'mispar katan im kol chai. So he says, if we look at the word...
It's 19, gematria.
Right, im kol chai, chava is 19, and im kol chai, mispar, gematria katan. The gematria katan means if there's a number that's beyond 10, for example, the mem. Mem is 40 in the regular gematria, and if you take in the gematria katana, you just take the 4. Anything above the number 10, you just take off the second
Up to 10, the gematria katana.
Right.
So let's say his name is Larry. Larry in Gematria Gdola would be 30 and 200
right.
and 10. In Ketana, instead of 30, it's 3. Right. Instead of 200, 2.
Right. And 10 would be 1. So, in this case, M Kol Chai, M is Aleph Mem, so that's 5. Kol is 5, that's 10. Chai is 8 plus 1 is 9, so you got 19. So Chava and M Kol Chai are 19. Okay, so that's what the Midrash says. So, the Zera Shimshon answers the first thing he says, V'hu Pela Kishmo, the Midrash Piliya, which is Piliya means wonder. He says the entire Midrash is a wonder. I don't get it. He says, what are we talking about here? Right? What's going on?
He's going to get the Torah. What are you telling me?
Right, exactly. We're going to get the Torah. I hear Hashem sees. Moshe says he sees Hashem saying Chava, Chaya. And to be honest, with respect to the Midrash, who cares whether it's Chava or Chaya? What's the difference? Right? At the end of the day, what are we talking about here? As he says, the Matzorach LaKadosh Baruch Hu Lomar Chavak Shalom Maron Maron L'Karol Torah. Right? Moshe is about to receive the Torah, and he sees Hashem saying Chava, Chaya. Okay. Umahu Zeh Shesha'al Lo Mai Chava. And what is the whole point of why is Moshe asking Hashem, why are you saying Chava? Doesn't Moshe know that Chava was called why Chava was called Chava as opposed to Chaya or whatever it is? These questions are obvious, and the Zera Shimshon generally asks very obvious questions, either on the pasuk or on the Midrash. ואין לומר שזה ששאלו משה היה בעת כתיבת ספר התורה, בעת כתיבת ספר התורה בספר בראשית, כשהגיע לכתוב חווה. We can't say that this is the time, like in other words, Moshe was asking the question when he wrote down when he was actually writing the whole story.
Hashem.
No, he can't say that when Moshe was writing down the Torah, right? The Zera Shimshon is we can't say that this is when Moshe was asking the question. Chava, should I write Chava? Should I write Chaya? You can't say that. דאם כן לא היה להקשות, אלא קושיה האחרונה, אם כן תקרנה חיה. דהקריא דכתיב כי היא הייתה עם כל חי. למה שאול לו מה חווה? Right? If we say that this whole...
It was during
the time when Moses was writing,
yeah.
then it says, im kol chai. So then why even mention the word chava? right? In other words, why would Moshe ask the word Chava? He should have just said Chaya, right? In other words, that's what the Zera Shimshon seems to be bothered by the fact that, or not bothered, but he's saying is maybe someone's going to say is this whole back and forth between Hashem was happening when Moshe wrote down the story, right? And therefore, because it was done when it was down the story, so that's when he was asking the questions. But he says that doesn't make sense because the pasuk reads in Kol Chai, so then Moshe should never should have said the word Chava.
He wouldn't ask why are you saying Chava? We're talking about Adam and Chava. If we're in Bereshit, we're talking about Adam and Chava.
Right.
And I'm not going to ask you who Chava is.
Exactly. So he says, "V'od ma'u haremes shechava mispar katan im kol chai." Like, okay, so big deal. So it's a mispar katan. That's nice and cute, but like, what's the whole remes behind it? So it's basically it seems like a very wondrous as the name of the Midrash itself. The whole Midrash, this whole book is called the Midrash Pliyah. This name of this Midrash. It's like I said, it's very the Midrashim there are very strange, wondrous, kind of unique Midrashim. Not that Midrashim in general are not unique, but these are even more unique. Okay, so we have one answer that I think is going to be impressive and a nice Dvar Torah for all of us to give at the Shabbos table. Okay, so it says here, "V'yuvan b'may da'amina b'midrash Rabbah al pasuk," and this is why he brings it in this week's parsha. In this week's parsha, what do we say? Ko tamar lebeit Yaakov elu hanashim v'lama lanashim tchila kedei sheyu megadlot b'neihem laTorah. So it says, what does it the pasuk say? The pasuk says, "Ko tamar lebeit Yaakov v'tagid livnei Yisrael." So it says, what do we look at the Sukim? Of course, we're going to get the
Shmos.
Yeah, here we go. So it says, Shmot. Here we go. Okay. Look at that. Open up almost the exact page. Okay, so it says, you'll be a wondrous, a leader of kings, Goy Kadosh, a nation that's holy. Elad Varim. Sorry, skip it. Go back. Sorry. I had it. Moshe Allah El Elohim, Moshe cry la Hashem in Ahar Lemo Ko Tamar Leveit Yisrael, Leveit Yaakov, V'Tagid Leveit Yisrael. Rashi on the spot says, Leveit Yaakov, Elu HaNashim, V'Tagid Leveit Yisrael. Rashi says, Peresh LaZacharim Dvarim HaKashim Tigidim. Explain to the men the things that are difficult like sinews, the things that connect the muscle.
Because Tomar is Lashon Racha and Deber is Lashon Kasha.
Exactly. Okay. So he says, "Shalom Moshe Malamaro Matzak Shakadosh Baruch Hu Omer Chava Klomar Shatorah Hi Notna LeNashim Tchila." Right. So he says, "Is what happened." Moshe, when he goes up, he says, "Hashem
Was telling him Chava first teach the women."
Right. Exactly. So exactly what he says here. Look what it says. He says, "Is Klomar Shatorah Haya Notna LeNashim Tchila." Amar lo Mai Chava Klomar Lama Nashim Tchila. Amar lo ki hi hayta en kol chai b'shvil shemegadlot b'neihem leTalmud Torah. So he says is why do we give it Chava? Why Chava? Right? So he says is because we give it to the women first because they are responsible for raising their children for Talmud Torah. Right? Now what does that mean? So it says, meaning their role as mother is there. If you think about it, when does the father's role start? The father's role as educating the child is at least at the minimum is age 3. Between 0 and 3,
It's the Ima.
right? She loves them, she cares for them, she instills them with some sort of basic Torah, like just the Ava and that extra stuff that, with respect to men, that don't necessarily are not always the best at it, right? And also, when you get to the point of age, when the child is at the age of learning Torah, then the father gets involved, either whatever age it may be, and that's why it says Tagid lebnei Yisrael. That's why it says Tomar lebeit Yaakov. That's why it says Tomar Lashon, which is like you said Lashon Rakah. Tagid is a little bit stronger. Valzen nikret em kol chai, and this is why it's called, and this is why she's called an em kol chai. As it says, what it says in the Masechet Ketubot, Minayin she'ola imo. What is the source that if a man marries a woman whose standard of living is prior to marriage was lower than his standard? But if her standard was higher, her standard was not downgraded. Rabbi Elazar Amar Ki Hi Hata En Kol Chai. because she was the mother of all living. L'chaim nikna. This teaches that Chava was granted as a wife to Adam for the sake of life. That she should live a good standard of living.
What's Ola lo Yored? What does that mean? That when you get a shidduch, you should
In other words,
take her up. You don't. In other words, don't take a woman that's a certain value and bring her down to lower value.
In other words, let's say the woman comes from a very strong background, right? In other words, a strong background meaning she comes from a wealthy background, and you don't come from as a wealthy background.
So then you can't marry her.
No, she said you shouldn't reduce her standards.
So what do you do?
That I don't know. I'm not answering that. I'm just saying she should always stay with the standard of living that she's accustomed to. That I don't know. The Maharsha, the Parshat Maharsha, the Mitchila Kra Isha. First, Adam calls her woman. Isha. Bichtiv Lezot Ikara Isha. Kime Isha Lukach Hazor. Right? First, he calls her a woman. Right? In other words, Ish Milashon Isha. Right? Which is the feminine version of Ish. La'achar shechatan. After she sinned, Chazal Likro Chava. She called her by his name Chava.
It's a big limud zchut. There's also, I think, a Jewish that says Chava is Chet Vav He, because she mafrid ben Vav He.
Yeah.
With the Chet of the.
Kadesh lo yomru she'adam igdulata b'shvil hachet. La'achar hachet hi b'gdulata. L'shvil ayta im kol chai shekol b'nei ha'olam ba'u mimena. So it said, in fact, he says is yes, maybe she sinned, but he says is so that way we don't say that maybe because of the sin she went down in her.
She's still called Em Kol Chai.
She's still called the Em Kol Chai.
Excuse my level of understanding or any of this, but there was no standard of living with Adam and Chava. There was nothing. They were both naked for, they had no money, they had no anything.
But they were taken care of completely.
Yes, they were taken care of completely, but there's no going up, there was no going down. There was just what it was.
The difference is not necessarily about the standard of living. It's about what their terminology is. One before the Chet, Adam calls her Isha, woman, and then after the Chet, he starts calling her Chava.
And you might think that after the sin, if you're a poor guy, you could lower the rich lady to marry you. Right. So said no, she's still an Em Kol Chai. You have to keep her on her level.
She raised him. So why would he go to her? Because she's below now.
Well, that's the point. That's exactly the point. The point is that she's not lower.
She's still Em Kol Chai.
She's still the mother of everything,
even though she's sick.
Yeah. You can read the English. If you read the English a bit, it'll also explain.
I did, and that's why I don't.
It says here. Look what it says. After she sinned with the forbidden fruit, Chazar Likota Chava. He called her by her new name, Chava. Kidei Shelo Yomru, in order that people should not say about her that she was lowered from her prominence together with her husband because of the sin, and that Adam's curse that led by the sweat of his brow would apply to her as well as would be implied by the name Isha. Rather, even after the sin, she remained in her state of prominence, Em Kol Chai, right? Since she was the mother of all living. Shekol b'nei ha'olam ba'u mimena. Therefore, Adam called her Chava to indicate that despite his living as having sinned and been cursed was with difficulty in earning a living, she was not dragged down by his sin. Right? The first that a woman's standard of life. Okay, that's the Gemara infers that. Now, what now he says? Look what he says. And the kasher, shalosh shutafim yesh ba'adam. Right? Don't we have three partners in marriage or in life? Right? What do you have?
Hashem.
Good.
Gives the neshama.
Right. You have the father.
The Abba gives the bones, and the Ima gives the blood.
The blood. Right. Exactly. That's a kedusha. Right? What happens? You have only 1/3, right? And you have three parts. That means each person is part.
So why are you calling her Em Kol Chai?
Right? So why are we all consider her the descendant of Chava and not Adam? Right? The reason is that the woman raises her children in preparation for the Torah study. Since the mother is the primary rearer of the young children. In fact, we say later in Sanhedrin, right? It says that the role of raising children, the role that is filled primarily by the mother, is even more significant than the bearing of children, right? There, the Gemara cites a verse that states that Michal had 4 sons.
Shemirav Yalda.
Mirav Yalda, right?
Michal Gidla. There was a lady.
Right, Mirav Yalda, Michal Gidla. V'nikru al Shem Michal, because raising the children is more significant than bearing them, right? He calls them Michal's children. Tichtiv Asher Yalda Michal. V'chen nikru al Shem Ha'isha. So what have we learned so far? We're learning Torah Yud Aleph. So it says
11.
11.
It's also like Batara.
Right, exactly. Bat Paro.
He had a name that he was named by his parents.
Well, whatever the name was, we don't know what it is, right? But
I mean, Tuvia or
whatever,
Victor,
right?
whatever.
Victor, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're right, exactly. So the same idea that the concept is page 388, if you want to look at it in English. So the concept is that the women, even though the point is that we look at the order of the pasuk. What is the Zera Shimshon bothered by? To kind of give a quick summary, the Zera Shimshon is bothered by the fact that you have this strange midrash called the Pliyah, which means wondrous, and indeed is wondrous. And it's a strange midrash in the fact that it doesn't really explain to us what's going on here. Moshe goes up to Hashemayim when he's getting the Torah. He sees Hashem saying the word Chava, Chaya, whatever, and there's a very strange conversation between the two of them. And so the Zera Shimshon asks the question: why do we have to even go into this whole conversation that Hashem has with Moshe about Chava, Chaya, and the Gematria? So he answers the question by saying is that if you look at the pasuk in this week's parsha, right before Bnei Israel get the Torah, it says Ko Tomar Beit Yaakov Elu Anashim V'lama Lanashim Tchila. Why do we give the Midrash asks why do the women get it first? Kadei Sheyu Megadlot B'nei the Torah, because the women need to get the basic structure in order so that they raise their children properly, right? The men only wait because their job and responsibility only starts later. Right, so what he says is that the women get the first taste of the Torah because they're the ones who give the children the first taste of the Torah. So he says that is exactly the whole point here, is that even with, right, so he says, and more so, as we go through this whole thing, he says, why is it that Hashem, why is it called Chava and not, why we start calling her Chava, as we mentioned later, that Chava, Adam starts calling her, referring to her as Isha first, because Ish and Isha, right? And then he realizes that after the sin, you might think that maybe after the sin, she should no longer be, get that credit, get that title. And he says no. Adam started calling her Chava, and from there the Gemara learns that that even after the sin, she is not liable to the punishment that Adam got, which was that he has to sweat and work hard. He's not liable. She's not the same.
No, she got a punishment.
She got a punishment.
Etzem Tolid Banim.
Right, but it's not the same. But she doesn't because the Etzem Tolid Banim is not the same punishment as what Adam got. Adam got is that you're gonna have to work hard for your money. Right. That's what Hashem basically said. Is you're gonna right. He says B'zeat Pechato Chalechem. That's for the man, not for the woman. And then from there, the Gemara learns. What does the Gemara learn? That the woman, she comes to a certain standard into the marriage. She stays at that standard no matter what. That's the role of the husband, is to make sure that she stays at that standard. It's not that she lowers her standard for the husband.
Phew.
From the
But
word.
didn't the wife?
Yeah. No.
That's her.
Yeah.
That's her
Mine's a
option.
bit Cinderella style, Baruch Hashem.
What's that?
He was gonna say about Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah.
It's her option.
There's her option.
She
right.
doesn't.
She doesn't
can
have
say you
to.
can go there.
Right. You
But
can,
that's I
Right.
can say, or I need to be.
Or,
with
right,
some-
she
you have to
can
make
be
me
like
happy
that.
and get.
Yeah,
the
she
work.
was Moko.
No,
Yeah.
she can say I'm willing to go down because I want my husband to learn, or whatever the case.
Yeah,
may
she
be.
slept in the straw.
Right, but that doesn't mean that the halacha says is that by halacha, by
Almost as
straight
bad as
halacha,
Gaza.
right? By straight halacha, her job is the husband is responsible to say this is the standard, and therefore I have to keep to it. But if she decides to say I'm willing to forgive that, that's something else. Okay, so now we have, and then what do we say? Why do we have a third? So we have this question, the famous question, really. The Gemara says you have three partners in the three partners in a person. What are the three people? Hashem, or three partners? Hashem, man and woman. So why do we call it in Kol Chai? We should be calling it also Adam, because he gets a part of it too, right? There's each one. Why do we only mention after a third?
All he does
Because
is give a putrid drop. That's all.
what's that?
All he does to contributes is a putrid
right.
drop.
Exactly. Well, that's part of it. Another part of it is that Hashem says because she is the woman is responsible for those first 3 years. Those first years are so impactful on what the child's future looks like. That's why we get.
Then you go back to
Also the child, he learns the Torah in the mother's stomach.
Right.
But he
Right.
forgets it all.
So then I'm going to go into. Hold on a second here. So what do we learn from this? I'm going to. Here, if you go to the last paragraph, just because I think the last paragraph is nice. Oh, yeah, we'll go to the last, Amarlo, sorry, let's go to the second to last paragraph. Zeu kshala no shalom aro. We're gonna skip two inamis. Inamis, he gives two other options, but he's gonna go to at the end, he kind of goes back to the beginning part of it again. So we're gonna go with that. It says, and this is why, Zeu kshala no shalom aro, and this is why, that Hashem, the Chava symbolizes the speech of life-giving Torah, right? And this is why when Hashem went up to Shemaim, when he goes up to receive the Torah, it says he sees Hashem saying Chava. Sheliknot haTorah v'achayim shenimshala l'isha b'vadai nimshalu l'isha rishona. Shenotzra miyad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzarich davka dibur k'mo Chava. Right. So he says this is why, because in order for Hashem, that Hashem wanted that in order for us to acquire the life-giving Torah, which is the responsibility of the woman. Right? In other words, he explains it earlier, which I skipped intentionally. He says, is he symbolized by a woman? He basically saying is that the responsibility and to acquire Torah properly, the woman has to give that extra push, that extra love, that extra care that a man doesn't always necessarily give. I'm not saying that the man can't do it, but generally speaking, the woman's love and support is necessary for someone to feel the mother. I'm not saying the woman. The mother's responsibility towards a child is to give that care, that extra hand, that extra support, that things that sometimes the father doesn't always give.
That's what happened with Moshe, with Yocheved.
Right, exactly. Yocheved is there, exactly right.
Still the mother.
Right, and Yocheved said, "I give the mother, let the mother take care of the baby," and therefore what happens? The mother and then raised. Right, exactly. And this is why he says here, once specifically the faculty of speech, in other words, Kmo Chava. Right, that Torah study, he says, this is the Zera Shimshon saying, Davka Dibor K'mo Chava. Torah study needs specifically the ability to speak like the name Chava. Shafa Pishayaita Im Kol Chai, even though Chava was indeed the mother of all living, and therefore she should been more appropriately called Chaya. In Kol Zeh, right, this goes back to the question. Oh, now we can start. All right, we're going to go back. We'll start again. Charles likes to do it.
online.
That's okay. You were on that, but I don't know if you were.
How is Chava?
For some reason,
the word Dibur.
better than me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What do you say?
Why is Chava connected to Dibur?
We're going to get to that in a second.
The word Chava means Dibur?
No, we're going to get to it in a second. What he says is why, but if we still have the question, the question remains for the Midrash Kliyah, why is she called Chava and not Chaya, like you said? If she's Ein Kol Chai, then she should be called Chaya. We still have this question. So the part that, so he says here, B'Hachanami, the same is true about the Torah. Alpha Pisha Torah Ikarahi Amoach V'Machshava V'Asrara Mikol Makom HaDibur Hu Yoter Chashuv. Right? So he says here. So he says same thing. In Kol Zeh, she's called Chava is called Chava, even though she would think that she should be called Chaya, like Moshe says in the Midrash, and that our whole logic is based on the fact that Chaya, right? It makes sense. So he says is that the Torah, the power and the ability of speech is similar to Chava. We're going to get to why in a second. And he says the Torah, similarly to the Torah, we can all use our brains and think about things internally. But the only thing that really helps and really enables us to really acquire the Torah is that ability to speak it out, and to talk it out, and to really converse. So he says here. What is the purpose? Why is she called Chava? Why Moshe is saying to Hashem, why is the speech so important? Why is the speech so important in terms of learning Torah? Amar lo ki hi hayta em kol chai, because she was the mother of all living. What does that mean? Shadibur kulam shavim bo. That is to say, speech.
In other words, you and any biggest tzaddik in the world, you could read the same text.
Exactly.
But what's in your head is different.
Exactly.
So Em Kol Chai is the reading.
Right, and it says here, Ben Ha'aratzot, Uveda Chachamim, right, all like you said. Any person can read the same Torah, can read the same Gemara, can read the same anything. Right, what's the difference? Upatatia deoraita tavim. The sages say, the Chachamim say that in Yerushalmi, he says that even the chatter, right, just talking about Torah is valued. Uschar kriya b'yado, and one is rewarded for it, yes. He says, since not every mind is suited for logical analysis, in other words, not everyone's brain is the same. We can all read the same words, right? We all can read, thank God, right? We can all read, and we all read the words the same way, right? We'll all say, Vayomer Hashem Moshe Lemor. We'll all say it. But one person will say as well, Vayomer here, Vayomer there, right?
You know what, that's pretty typical when the 12 tribes brought their offering. It was all the same, but it meant
Exactly. That's the same
differently
exactly.
for them.
Exactly. That's exactly what he's saying. He's saying is that the chachamim, the people who are, let's call it the leaders of our generation, and the people who are simple-minded can both read the psukim the same way. The difference is how they analyze things in their brain. Right? Interpret it. Thank you. That's a better word. Right now he says, okay, now we'll go back even more. It says, Amar lo im ken tikrena chaya. If so, that if we say that shehu shayach yutrena im kol chai. Right? So now we explain it even more. He says, if so, let's call her chaya. Right? Because whereas chava is derived from the word, right? In other words, is a derivative form. Chava is a derivative form of the word chaya. Nishma mina minami. At the same time, it also applies to dibur yoter ikar. That speech is a simple aspect of Torah. What's the difference between someone who's alive and someone who's not alive? The difference ability is what? To speak. Right? One of the main things is obviously they can't breathe anymore, but one of the main things is that they can't speak. Right? I love this because this is one of the best uncluses in the world. And unclus says,
It's quite a statement.
what?
Quite a statement.
It is. Vahi adam lenefesh chaya. And what does unclus say?
Ruach memamala.
Ruach memalala. Right? The ability for us to speak.
It's world
What?
famous.
Right, what?
My sure it's a world famous Rashi.
Right, well famous, right, right, exactly. Rashi quotes, right, he's quoting the unclus. Right, he says, Chava b'misvar kata im kol chai. The gematria of Chava is the same as the small gematria of im kol chai. Im hayiti koreh la Chava, mashma dibur shalem, dahainu k'shadam yeh gadol, v'yisa v'yitem b'torah, karoi hadibur mevi chayim.
Why is chaya dibur shalem?
Okay, וזהו הדיבור החשוב. הקדוש ברוך הוא, אבל בעיני הקדוש ברוך הוא. אבל כשהתינוק קטן, הוא מדבר ואינו יודע מה לדבר, ואמו מחנכתו, הייתי אומר שאין הדיבור חינוך זה חשוב לפני המקום. לכך קרבה חווה. כלומר, כל זמן שידבר בתורה, יהיה מי שיהיה קטן או גדול, הוא חשוב בעיני המקום, לכן נקט מספר קטן. שאדרבה, העולם עומד על הבל תינוקות שהוא בהבל שאין בו חן. So he's saying is that Chava represents, and I skipped it because it gets a little bit complicated in the Zera
But
Shimshon.
does the word chava mean speech anywhere? Because it says yechaveh da'at somewhere.
Right.
Does it say that?
I don't remember. Let me just see here. Doesn't mention it here. But he says, but the idea is that Chava represents an aspect of let's call it smaller-minded talking conversations, right? Which is what happens when a mother talks to a child when she's younger. She does the smaller stuff. She does the cooing. She does the loving. She does the
Soft a bit?
a little, yeah. So she says, she mentions that kind of conversation. That's what the mother does. And if had Hashem called her Chaya, which is like let's call it the older, more mature, then people might think this is what the Zera Shimshon says. He says is that people might think that that's the only car of the conversation. In other words, it's only the talk that the logical, the high talking between Chachamim. And he says, no. The chatter of Torah is just no matter what. Just like a woman when a woman speaks to her child when the child is young, and she does those small, caring signs of love and caring of raising that child. Those words, those things make a huge impact in the child, right? So you might think that stuff has no meaning, but he's saying is, if we look back, that's why the woman is mentioned. Kotomar V'nei Yaakov, the Tagid of Kotomar V'nei Yaakov. Excuse me. He says V'nei Yaakov. That's what Rashi and the Gemara and the Midrash says. That referring to what? Referring to the women. So he says this is the value of the women is that the women have that first responsibility to raise the child. And that first responsibility, even though the conversation itself is quote unquote less, high level, less impressive, that like the Torah that happens after the child learns to develop and speak, that talking, that speech, and that conversation that they have is even on a higher level, and therefore that's why the woman is mentioned first in the order of which Matan Torah, and also mentioned as Chava is mentioned. Chava is representative of a conversation that happens that doesn't necessarily, it's like that smaller chatter that happens in between the bigger conversations. So yes, everyone can speak, can read, we can all read the same words like you said, right? Even Chachamim and Shutei Am can read the same Sukkim, but the point is that the brain, it develops at a different pace, and so some people have like this wondrous ability to develop, but it only is because the woman was able to help the child grow up And that smaller conversation happens first, and that small chatter that happens between a mother and a child, that connection happens early. And that connection is really what the power of what the woman's able to do to her child.
Beautiful, wow.
First one. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Yeah.
What a
It's another
beautiful
good
time.
Wow.
Oh, Robbie.
Yeah.
Oh, Hashem, we got all
One of
kinds
my
of-
favorite vegetables. It's the Israeli version of jicama. You know jicama?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.